This has been the worst week for the Jewish people in our lifetimes, except for those who are old enough to have been alive at the time of the Holocaust.
This year, Shabbat Simchat Torah saw depravity and cruelty wrought upon our family in Israel in the form of atrocities that defy all logic and reason.
There are no adequate words to describe the devastation, the tragedy, and the massacre of our people that happened last Shabbat, Simchat Torah, Shemini Atzar.
Hundreds of revelers at a dance party, at least 150 innocent people taken captive, mothers and children, elderly people in wheelchairs, peace activists.
Entire families slaughtered. Families smoked out of safe rooms as their homes were set on fire and then taken at gunpoint into captivity. Young women being degraded, abused, and assaulted, teenagers. Shoah survivors themselves, those who came face to face with unmitigated evil and prevailed, now once again forced to confront what happens in this world when human beings manually override their instinctive humanity and plunge into the depths of darkness and human cruelty. What they did to the babies, I can't even repeat.
More Jews were killed last Shabbat than in any other day since the Holocaust. Thousands more Jews are injured. The trauma Israelis are experiencing cannot be overstated.
So much brutality, so many innocents murdered and held captive, so much deprivation and death. And let's be honest, the ground is oozing blood on both sides.
The massacre of Simchat Torah 5784 will go down in history as one of the most horrific in history.
The atrocities committed by the malicious murderers of Hamas are an outrage and an abomination, a modern-day pogrom, an evil that has not been inflicted upon our people since the darkest days of the Shoah. There is no justification or historical context for these unspeakable acts.
There is no justification. There is no context that excuses the brutality and the terror that Hamas visited upon our people last Saturday.
What happened last Shabbat cannot be justified or explained by the occupation.
There are no claims for military resistance or strategic defense. It can only be seen as heinous barbarism that history will judge with contempt and disgust.
The clear message from many people in the world, especially from our world, those who claim to care about justice and human dignity, is that these Israeli victims somehow deserved this terrible fate. This week, I read statements from longtime allies that shock the conscience.
The celebrations of the atrocities, the blaming of Israel for the atrocities, the excusing of the atrocities, the silence about the atrocities. This is utter lack of human empathy. This is moral debasement and dissolution.
In these statements was not only a failure to condemn the atrocities committed against these innocents, but proud support for Hamas. This week, we entered the upside-down world when a retrograde, regressive, totalitarian, misogynistic, messianic terrorist regime became, for the time being, the hero of the left. How could it be?
Avner Gvaryahu, the fearless leader of Breaking the Silence, an Israeli who has endured hate and hardship for years for standing up for Palestinians, said this: "There are some things that must be made crystal clear. Hamas has committed crimes that should horrify any decent person. As people who firmly criticize Israeli policy in Gaza and the West Bank on a daily basis, it is our moral duty to state things as they are. This weekend, Hamas blatantly violated humanity's basic moral norms. I would say it this way. No one had this coming to them. No one could possibly have this coming to them. There is no history, background, theory, analysis, oppression, harm, or grievance that justifies what Hamas did. None.
To justify barbarity in the service of decolonization and the liberation of Palestine requires more than an ideological commitment to Palestinian freedom. It demands mental and emotional contortions that render a person fundamentally unable to see the humanity in a Jew. How does a person look at a campaign of annihilation and see a quest for liberation?
In his New York Magazine piece entitled "A Left That Refuses to Condemn Mass Murder is Doomed," Eric Levitz writes, "In my view, these responses constitute a betrayal of the left's most fundamental values. Either one upholds the equal worth of all human beings, opposes war crimes, and despises far-right ethno-nationalist political projects, or one doesn't, making it easier for their adversaries to discredit and marginalize the broader cause of Palestinian liberation. For those who callously called Shabbat's pogrom a step toward decolonization, I ask that they consider where the Jews who fled from Iraq are supposed to go. And what about those who fled from Iran? And those from Yemen? And those from Russia? And those from Ethiopia? And how about the Jews who came from Europe after surviving the Holocaust? They were dispossessed of their land and their homes and their belongings, just as their ancestors were dispossessed by the Romans in the first 2 centuries of the Common Era and the Babylonians before them. This does not in any way justify the dispossession of Palestinians from their land and homes and belongings, but it is a fact. It is a fact. Here we are, two peoples stuck together. There is no way forward without recognizing that fact.
I'm not opposed to engaging with moral complexity. I can abhor the murderous Hamas, and I can condemn the tragedy of the settler Orthodox nationalist occupation.
I'm no fan of Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'm no fan of many current Israeli government policies and going before dealing with the Israeli-Palestinian challenge. Let me be clear. You can support or disagree with Israeli policy and still say this was depraved and deranged.
For decades, I have strongly and unequivocally opposed the occupation. I have spoken out against Israel's increasingly hardline, ultra-nationalist, and now messianic government. It has not been easy to speak out in this current climate. I have received death threats. I have lost friends and donors and congregants for speaking this way over the years, for insisting that the only liberation is a shared liberation, that our destinies as Jews and Palestinians are tied up in one another. And I still believe, even after Shabbat Simchat Torah, all of that. In fact, it is precisely from that particular moral vantage point that I say today, unequivocally, defending Hamas's atrocities does not signal that you care about justice for Palestinians.
Let's be clear. Hamas is not one and the same as the Palestinian people.
Israel is now seeking to incapacitate Hamas and to bring back the hostages. Those are legitimate goals. And we must not ask Israel to refrain from pursuing them. But we must also plead, pray, and lobby that they stop doing so through indiscriminate bombing. IDF spokesman Dan Hagari said on Tuesday, the emphasis is on damage and not accuracy. We have already heard barbaric calls for the annihilation of Palestinians from the Jewish right and from within the Israeli government. And we are reminded that the members of the Israeli government that we have been protesting this year and for many years are still there in this unity government, with their racism and propensity for brutality against Palestinian people.
But it is more. It is so much more, because I am so deeply angered by this Netanyahu government and the responsibility it bears in ways that are too many to count. Let that phrase just stay in your heads for a moment. Too many ways to count that this government bears responsibility. For their sins and the sins this government committed, there must someday be a reckoning for all that went wrong on their watch.
Remember, this is the government that left southern Israel undefended because it was so busy with its divisive, selfish, and Jewish supremacist agenda.
Now, this is a scary time, and Jews feel justifiably wronged and justifiably worried.
Like you, I am overwhelmingly sad at the loss of life. Like you, I am scared for the hostages. I'm actually terrified for the hostages. Like you, I am angry, so angry at Hamas terrorism, and so angry, so disturbed at the echoes of Jewish history this has stirred. And like you also, I am mystified by the failures of intelligence and security, and I am terrified by them. And I am horrified, like you, by the overwhelming loss of life in Gaza. And like you, I fear of more.
But though our souls are seared with fury and our faith tried by uncertainty, we must be driven, not by the bloodlust of vengeance, but by the clarion call of justice. Not by a corrupting hatred, but by a defining determination. Not by a desire only to eradicate today's enemy, but a responsibility to combat the evil for which we are the world's eternal witness, with eyes ever turned toward tomorrow's path to peace.
As Nicholas Kristof wrote, if you care about human life only in Israel or only in Gaza, then you don't actually care about human life.
We absolutely must, as a Jewish community, show how we are different than those barbaric terrorists. We never celebrate, nor in any way dismiss the killing of innocents, of Palestinian innocents, which has happened and sadly will continue to happen.
As much as we do not let those who seek to destroy us prevail, neither do we let those who suffer from gross moral miscalculations define this moment.
We must still and always strive to maintain the holiness of our humanity, even in the darkness of the abyss.
My humanity depends on not giving up on my values, not giving up into darkness.
We, like all people, hunger to be understood by those outside our community. We hunger to be seen in our suffering. Our humble ask is that people give a damn when we die.
It is often the case that Israelis and Jews are not seen in our full humanity, in our pain and in our goodness. We deserve to be seen.
When the darkness comes, who will sit and weep by your side? Who will share your worry? Who will not be scared away by your grief and vulnerability, but will come closer to it? Who will see you?
I see all of you. I see you in your shock, and I see you in your grief, and I see you in your fear, and I see you in your anger, and I see you in your despair, and in your confusion, and in your worry. I see you in your feeling of disconnection, and I see you in your feeling of aloneness. I see you in your feeling that no one cares. I see you in your feeling of abandonment by those who you thought shared your values. I see you in your feeling of being hated. I see you in your feeling of being the perpetrator more than the victim. I see you in your shame. I see you in your feeling of just plain pain. The monstrosity of last Shabbat is defined and compounded by not being seen in our full humanity.
Where is our humanity? Our humanity is in acts of solidarity. Communities are organizing itself to visit those in need, to organize funerals for all those needed, funeral after funeral. The democracy movement organized themselves now to become a support system for the whole state of Israel. They're using all the resources, their WhatsApp groups, their organizing tools that I've been using for the last 40 weeks to help.
And Israelis and Jews are not the only ones who feel like the world doesn't see us and doesn't care. 2 million Palestinian people are trapped inside of Gaza, half of them children. Most of them living in hunger already, were living in hunger. Bombs are already turning their cities to rubble. 400,000 people are already homeless, and now they're rushing to evacuate the north.
I tried to hold compassion also for those in Gaza, for the Gaza people and their humanitarian disaster, while continuing to denounce the horrific tragedy Hamas befell upon our people and state clearly that at this moment that Israel must defend itself. And I'm having a really hard time accessing that compassion. I am. Because I'm crying for my people, for my sufferings. But my humanity depends on accessing that compassion for the Gazan people and for those who are now in this terrible humanitarian disaster. My humanity depends on that. My humanity depends also in differentiating between defending ourselves and revenge.
The grievous suffering of Palestinians is similarly defined and compounded by Palestinians not being seen in their full humanity. And just as we deserve to be seen, they too deserve to be seen.
For too long we have said about each other, "Am I my brother's keeper?" That is, of what concern is the other to me?
We all have within us Cain, the somethingness, the self-interest, the part of ourselves that is unique and is important and will not be silenced. And we all have within us Havel. We all have a recognition that in the grand scheme of things, in the cosmos, we are nothing.
Must find a way to reject the self-centered response that throws back the cynical question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Or a response that says, "They hurt us, so let's hurt them back."
There's a time for everything under heaven. There's a time for war and a time for peace. And so the complicated emotion I'm feeling is sorrow and distress at every single loss of life, because I have some Cain within me too, because I want a world where there is uniqueness and diversity and where the Jewish people are a part of that. Because we will not roll over and be nothing. Because in a world of nothing, it might be paradise, but we're gone. And in a world where it's all something, that's a world of complete violence. We have a tradition that has a vision for a future of universal peace. And I'm feeling really scared and afraid about the time of war that is upon us, and hopeful that it is short and brief and successful to return every person who was taken home with a minimum of loss of life, and a remembrance that we stand for something that's worth standing for.
Our close encounter with the pain of the narrowing of the lens of moral concern must awaken us to the danger of narrowing our own lens of moral concern. The fact that other people have lost their damn minds must awaken us and ensure that we don't lose our damn minds in the days ahead.
This Shabbat, I pray for all of us, here, Israel, Gaza, the strength to chain the fury of passion. Let us have the patience and strength to allow wisdom to grow, and with wisdom let something better grow.
I am inspired by words of Avi Dabush, who lives, I hope he can go back home, in Kibbutz Nirim, one of the kibbutzim near the border in Gaza. And he had reported from the first moment, first from the safe room for a few days, as he could hear still the terrorists outside in his kibbutz, and then coming out to encounter many people of his community, either dead or hostages. He's the executive director of Rabbis for Human Rights in Israel, and a rabbinical student and a former Knesset member who has been working for dialogue and for peace. And every report of Avi, the hardest ones, he has ended with the words, Ani ma'amin, I believe. I wrote to him and I said, I'm having a hard time to say I believe, but if you can say it, I have no choice but to join you.
I know it sounds impossible, but there is no other way.
As the leaders of all of Israel's human rights organizations wrote in a joint statement this week, faith in the human spirit, in the good that exists in it, is more necessary now than ever. One thing is clear to us already now. On humanity and the faith in humanity, we will not give up, even in these days when it is harder than ever. May that faith be restored for all of us, and may we make our lives a blessing.